We know there's a need for focus on teenagers and adults. So that's where we're going to be focusing. A lot of our speakers, our activities are all going to be focused. We are now bringing more the young people who could tell us. Okay, real loud.
Evening, everyone. I'm Tom Island, and I recently wrote my very first book, Come to Life, Your Guide to Self-Discovery. This is me talking to your peers, or rather me talking to my peers, about the journey I've been through and what I've learned along the way. I call it Come to Life because when I was going off to college, as someone with autism, I realized life was too short to wait for life to come to me. It was up to me to come to life. And that's what created this book. I wrote it with my mother, Emily, who has 10 years experience of being a family advocate. Can everyone hear me better now? So I'll be out in the main hallway talking about this book further. It just became an Amazon #1 bestseller last night.
Wow.
We have him scheduled to come and speak and share his book with other great activities. If you notice in our social event calendar, we have something special that's coming up. It's called the FAA Sparks Club. So we have Deborah, our vice president. She's been working on this very diligently with Natalia. And these two parents who are board members are really gearing up to develop a club for teenagers and young adults. And it's coming soon, it's in the planning stages, so pay attention to it, it's going to be awesome. So it's a way to get teens and young adults together with typical peers and do fun things. And that we're all learning from each other and being able to really manage the community and social skills and all the things that we all need to get together when we grow up. So this is going to be an amazing activity. This was a national entity, consortium, and she represented California, right? Sort of, okay. She'll correct. Yes, she served as the past president of the Association of University Centers on Disabilities and currently serves on the board. That's a big deal because they have these centers for excellence on developmental disabilities all over the country. We happen to have two. One at UCLA and one at Children's Hospital USC. Oh, three?
Mine is statistics.
Oh, really? Okay, okay. And so we're lucky to have three, but we're lucky to have two in LA County, and that we can really get the latest and the best from these two organizations. So with no further ado, I'd like everybody to please welcome Dr. Rayner.
An overview of what has contributed to an enormous sea change here in California and across the nation to now emphasize employment as the priority outcome for youth and young adults as they transition to adulthood. Just from my own knowledge, how many of you here have children that are transition age coming out of high school? Okay, so quite a few. And how many already, I guess the others are adults? And very young children, because I'm happy to speak to you as well. Less so, but it's really important that you hear this now and not 20 years from now. So I'm hoping to touch on something that will be meaningful to all of you. Next slide, please. That's good. That was good. There you go. Perfect. No, no. Perfect. Stop. I win. I just want to tell you that I just want to correct about the consortium only because I want to do a Yoo-Hoo California. California was one of 8 states that was selected through a highly competitive process to receive a project for national significance. You've heard about grants and contracts and things, but we were provided support by the feds to put together a consortium, and this was before the state had any policy for employment first, to look at what we could do in California to change policies and practices to increase the employment of youth and young adults with developmental disabilities. here in California. And we put together that consortium of 25 agencies, 45 representatives from around the state. And the fruits of our labor are reflected in this presentation. And fast forward, I will be talking to you about the California Competitive Integrated Employment Blueprint. But before I get started, also a shout out to, I'm an OT also. I'm a psychologist and an occupational therapist, so I'm always excited when I hear about the great work of an OT, so it's near and dear to my heart. So, I'm going to start with what's typically the elephant in the room. And that is, I don't think my child or my adult is going to be able to work. I just don't think, I don't see it in the future based on what I'm either seeing in school or the degree of support that they need to be out in the community. So I want to tell you a little bit about Jeremy. Some of you may be familiar. He too has co-authored books with his mom, Chantal. And I titled this A Career in Progress. That is not his title, but this is a quote from him about his work. And I came to know Jeremy because as part of our consortium, we had a youth advisory committee, and Jeremy served as one of our youth advisors. And as you all know, autism expresses itself in a variety of different ways. And Jeremy, very intelligent, talented, and an extremely important contributor to our youth advisory group, which was charged to kind of comment on the services and supports that are provided in our various systems. Anyway, Jeremy was one who never could sit still. He paced the room. He participated virtually because he's in the San Diego area. He very frequently paced the room, but always was on target with what we were talking about. He communicates. You can see here with he points and uses a letterboard to communicate. And I think that his mother would tell you, because she has co-presented with me in the past, that Jeremy throughout his life was underestimated. No one could fully appreciate how intelligent he was, could encourage him to dream and think about his future. So he was one of many who left school with no specific plan of what it is he was going to do as an adult. His aspiration, his most important aspiration, is he wanted to live on his own, which he does now. He has an apartment and he has a support team that helps him in his apartment. And one night he shared with his mother that he had had a dream, and that it was that he was painting, and that he was painting and he saw people's colors, and that he envisioned a very, very large painting. And his mom aptly said, "We'll never know until we put a paintbrush in your hand whether or not that dream or that idea can be a reality." Well, Jeremy is an extremely talented painter, and don't have the time to go into his technique and what he does, but suffice to say, he also qualified to receive a mini grant from the California Arts Council and the National Arts and Disability Center to support his career development. And what he did for that project was he painted a collection. He had a nice collection of artwork. And he went and displayed and sold his work at the Artwork Liberty Station, and that's in the San Diego area. And one of the requirements is as we help emerging artists, is to ask them, so what did you gain by this experience? We supported, I don't remember what the details were, but the grant itself might have supported supplies, it might have supported framing, I don't really remember at this point. But suffice to say, he learned about his product. So by displaying his work and selling his work at the event, he learned that he tends to want to make big paintings, but that what really sells are smaller paintings. And it's that kind of lesson for someone who's self-employed, has a product to sell, that you want them to not only be able to further develop his artistic skills, which I could also speak to you a long time about, but in this case it was his business skills. So he has to learn simultaneously both what the tasks are for an artist and what the tasks are to be an independent businesswoman person. So I wanted to use Jeremy as an example of dream big, support your child or adult's vision, and help them navigate their way through the morass of services and supports if that's what you choose, if that's the direction you choose to seek support for their careers. Next slide, please. So quickly, what time do I have till? Just so I know.
Like, I'll tell you, 8:30.
8:30,
Yeah.
perfect, okay. You know, public policy, I could imagine you all sort of, being ready to either say, why are you talking to a group of parents about public policy? I think it is really critical that you have a sense of what the changes are that have happened. When the Lanterman Act, is anybody here familiar with the Lanterman Act? Okay, Regional Center. Okay, so when the Lanterman was established decades ago, it was a public statement, a really important public statement about the value of people with developmental disabilities, inclusive of autism, in the state of California. Because people of California thought it was so important that a system was established to ensure from cradle to grave that people had, individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, had the services and supports they needed from cradle to grave. We are the envy of the nation. Regardless of what our problems are, we are far from perfect. I do a lot of national speaking. We are the envy of the nation. However, our system was really designed for health and safety, right? I see a lot of nods. How can we best take care of people? Initially, institutions, right? Then in, community programs. And now we're moving into an era of self-determination. Supporting this sea change are a lot of policies. And this all came about because of families like you, because of self-advocates standing up and saying, or sitting down and rolling into the room and saying, we want a meaningful life, and that meaningful life means being in the community, being with people with and without disabilities, doing meaningful work, doing things that I enjoy to do, and being as independent as possible, and probably many other descriptors that I'm not using right now. So my role tonight is to highlight what public policy is, why it might be relevant to you, and some of the big changes that are happening here in California that are transforming our education system, our rehabilitation system, our developmental disability system, to one that is prioritizing employment as the priority outcome. It doesn't say employment and not anything else. It just says that employment is the marker that we're using. Competitive integrated employment is the marker we are using as sort of our North Star. There's so many benefits to work. And we want people with developmental disabilities to have that opportunity. And then I'm going to hopefully leave you with some practical actions that you can take based on what you hear. And I'm really pleased that I think the speaker you have next month and other speakers you're going to have down the road will even be able to take you further with what to do with this information in your day-to-day life. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to clarify is what we mean by employment and competitive integrated employment. The word employment itself is not new to our system. The regional center system has been supporting people in various kinds of employment settings for decades. The vast majority were supported in sheltered workshops. Those are typically a facility-based work program where people are doing various kinds of contract work that vary quite a bit in terms of quality. They were never intended to be a destination, but that's what happened. It became a place our folks went, our young people went, and it became an endpoint because very few transition out. In fact, one of the important things about valuing employment in the community that you should know is I've looked at years of data. I've looked at years of information about what happens when individuals with developmental disabilities and autism inclusive leave high school and make a decision about how they want to spend their day, whether it's a day program, an employment program, some other kind of community program. Very few change their mind. So that decision that someone makes at 17 or 18, maybe 22, is a life sentence. Very few change their mind or go. People very rarely who are in day programs choose work. Very few who are in work later choose to go to a day program. The line is rather flat. But I digressed a little bit. Employment within the DD system historically has meant either sheltered work, group work, where people went out in small enclaves, maybe even larger groups, and might perform various activities, anything from janitorial work to working in restaurants, to a variety, typically in areas of food. I'm going to be a little dark here. Food, filth, filing, those are sort of the main kind of areas that people were doing sort of group work. And then there was a very, very small number that actually had individual supported employment. And that involved working with a provider, finding work that they wanted to do, and typically having long-term job supports. So when we talk today about competitive integrated employment, we're talking about real jobs in the community that pay what other people earn who are doing similar work, and that the individual receives the same kinds of benefits, whether it's vacation time, sick time, whatever it is, holiday time, that whoever else has that job receives. And that they're spending their time with people with disabilities and without disabilities, but that the balance, the ratio, mirrors society at large. So they're not in a business where they're relegated to working exclusively with 2, 3, 4 other people with disabilities. They're part of the fabric of whatever that business is. So the question was, is this too aggressive for employers? Fantastic question, and one that would be logical to ask. We're not saying that that person does not have supports. So we're saying, and I appreciate you making me clarify that we're talking about that individual will be working with whatever supports they need to successfully do a job. But I want to tackle that employer question, and I'll try to do it quickly. As part of our work for CC, the California Employment Consortium, we went into 7 communities and had community conversations. And the question we asked in each of these communities, it involved about 80 individuals per community, and we did it in the north, we did it in the south, we went as far up as Butte County. We held these community conversations with about 40 to 60 individuals. They were individuals from the community, could have been faith-based, civic members, church leaders, people working in colleges, people who worked in the disability space. We had youth self-advocates at every of the conversations. So it was a mixture. It sort of more mirrored your typical community, these community conversations. And of the 400, I'm going to say about 480 that we had, there were 80 employers that were involved in the conversation. And what we learned was that employers are looking for qualified workers. And if you have a qualified worker who can help them meet their bottom line, to meet whatever it is they need to do for their industry, they're open. And I felt like at each of these conversations, one was held at Twitter, one was held in a fairgrounds, one was held at a community endowment, a foundation. So we held them at all kinds of places. And we heard this over and over again, that there's a need to create stronger linkages between the rehabilitation and disabilities world and the employers so that they can learn from one another. But once they have success, success breeds success. Like we had the assistant district, or one of the district attorneys from San Francisco, and I don't remember exactly who it was, who talked about her front staff person was a woman with a developmental disability. And her job was to triage, was to assess how urgent was this person who walked through the door cold. Do I immediately have to find a lawyer to interact with her, or can I have her wait? And the prosecutor, her boss, sang her praises, said this is a tough job, she has great people skills. We also heard from places that had video gaming establishments, GameStops, I think it was called, the store, that were very successful at having people who worked in their store who loved video games and were really great at explaining to others why they, the intricacies of one game over another. So we heard a lot of very positive things from employers That's not to say that it doesn't take work to get there. And I think that's what I hope our panelists are going to talk. We're going to have some young panelists talk to us today, who hopefully will shed light for us of what it took for them to learn their job duties and what it's like for them being out there in the work world. So I don't want to minimize your question, but I think that the bottom line is, are we preparing our youth or our adults to be in the work world? Are we doing it? Right now, we're not doing such a hot job, I gotta be honest with you. Schools aren't doing what they need to do. Department of Rehabilitation is not doing what they need to do sufficiently, and the regional center needs to do more. But I think that there's a recognition of this, like there's never been before, and that has to do with the policies. Okay, so what is public policy? So, usually a policy comes about because there's a problem. Laws, regulations, and policies on a day-to-day basis. We all follow rules of the road, or at least some of us. But we also have other policies that dictate other kinds of access and availability of services and supports that we might need on a daily basis. A policy is made on behalf of the public. It is not, it is something that, as I was referring earlier to the Lantern Act, it is by the wishes of the public that we invested in people with developmental disabilities. And similarly, a public policy is indeed sort of enacting the will of the people. It is directed towards a goal, a desired state or solution of a problem. Policies are made by governments, although we know that it is the power of parents that have played the most instrumental role in changing policies, specifically disability policies, and we know how important your voice is. They also are based on attitudes, cultural ideals, or accepted rules, and employment is a good example here. For years, there were no expectations that a person would lead a productive life in terms of employment by people with disabilities, and the statistics demonstrated that. Very, very few people were employed. We'll get into some of the statistics in a minute. And so it was sort of the norm that I would get calls from transition teachers to say, how do you write an IEP goal for a child who's going to be transitioning into a sheltered workshop? What do you think my answer was? That was what I was thinking, but what do you think I might have said? Whose goal is that? Because really, that's kind of like, is that your goal? Is that something, I can't imagine a young person coming into you and saying, gee, when I grow up, I want to be in a sheltered workshop. That person may have come to you and said, I kind of think about, I like doing things with animals, or I like office work, or something, something that tells you about their interests. But I doubt that they came to you. So what my recommendation was is you need to find out more about that person and find out what it is that they're aiming for themselves. And it's also an ongoing process. The Lantern Act, developed in the late 60s, every year you can read an update of things that are modified or tweaked or changed that responds to the landscape, the conditions of the land, what things are happening, our beliefs, our expectations, funding. There's a lot of reasons that things change. Next slide, please. So, in the case of employment legislation, and there's a lot of different kinds of legislations, what are some of the issues or problems that we're trying to solve? So, regardless of intellectual ability, employment rates of individuals with autism range from 4.1 and 11.8% in adulthood. And this data comes from, for the most part, long-standing data collected of individuals after they've left school. There's been a 10-year national longitudinal study, and I think a lot of this data comes from that database. So there's very low employment, or chronic underemployment. So there might be individuals with autism who've gone to college, and they leave college and they sit on the couch. So there's also chronic underemployment. And then there's the issue of long-term, regardless of ability across the spectrum. There's just lower participation rates than you would expect, both among people with disabilities, so compared to people with disabilities as well as compared to typically developing youth. There are lower rates of participation in college and employment. Next slide, please. So what are some of the core values that have to do with competitive integrated employment? And these two have changed, just as society at large grows and learns from experience and attitudes shift and change. One of the things we've learned, and that is reinforced over and over again in most legislation, is that disability is part of the normal human experience. You'll either age into it or acquire some form of disability during your lifetime, perhaps through a medical condition or a trauma, etc. And then there are people who are born with various disabilities. But that it is part of the human condition, and that indeed 1 in 5 Americans are individuals with disabilities. So it's a recognition and an appreciation for human differences. Secondly, one of the visions is that we have high expectations and equal opportunity for people. So rather than thinking about what someone can't do and just assume they can't do it, our frame of reference should be as high as possible, that given sufficient supports, employers will embrace them. Given sufficient supports or given a community of supporters, or given the talents and capabilities of that individual, we should think high. We should expect a great deal. And that there should be equal opportunity. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, that the civil rights of people with disabilities are increasingly recognized and supported, to have equal access and equal opportunity to communities. The right to choice, self-direction, integration, and productivity are core values of most of this legislation that embrace employment. That we should expect coordination and collaboration among systems. And here I'm referring to those that you know well, the education, rehabilitation, and regional center systems is really the focal point of my talk tonight. There are other systems in the state of California. As we move more into this realm of employment, there's a whole workforce system. Some of you may have heard of one-stops or America Job Centers. The state of California has an employment plan for all of Californians. And due to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, rehabilitation now sits at the table when they're making the plans for all workers, all Californians, so that people with disabilities are part of that conversation. And very importantly, things don't change unless they're measured. So there's a degree of an accountability. The regional center system, while there were performance contracts, never were accountable for what the outcome was in the way that is being expected now for employment. They're being asked, how many consumers within the regional center system have jobs? What are their wages? What kind of occupations are they engaged in? What kinds of supports do they need to get their to support them in their jobs? So there's no pop quiz at the end of this, but I just really wanted to give you a flavor for the types of legislation that are out there, and to think about, as I spoke earlier, what is public policy? What is the problem that this legislation might be aiming to solve? What are the core values that are implied by what this legislation is all about? And what does this have to do with employment? So that's kind of what I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. So one of the older sort of laws that I refer to in these speeches, these talks, is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was signed into law by President Bush. And by the way, we're not talking politics, but these laws would not have happened without bipartisan agreement and support. So the things we're talking about here are not a Democratic or a Republican issue. This is an issue of the people. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was all about taking civil rights laws and shining a light on people with disabilities to ensure that they're not discriminated against for employment. Someone can't come in for a job and be told they can't have that job simply because they have a disability. The American Disabilities Act covers other aspects of public life, but I'm just going to refer today to those aspects that have to do with employment. It says that people have a right to accommodation. So if you are qualified for the job, you can do the job duties, sometimes referred to now as essential functions. You can do the job. You don't even have to disclose, if you chose not to, that you have a disability until you've been hired, at which point you would identify yourself as a person with a disability and talk to your supervisor in a dialogue about what supports you need to do your job well. That might be an adaptive keyboard, that might be a quiet workplace, that might be a headset to reduce sounds. It could be a variety of accommodations depending on what your needs are. IDEA, which is our fundamental education law. Here I just want to point to the importance of that transition IEP. Those of you that are adults have already experienced that with your adult child. Those of you who are in the midst of it, later on I have some specific recommendations about things that you want to make sure are included. But the requirement at the schools, and this is what's important, is that they are required to specify transition services in the IEP after the age of 16. And the goals and services, the content of the IEP should be designed on helping that child make that passage from K-12 to post-school life, whether that's more preparation and training through higher education or directly to employment. But the pass-off, I have a dear friend who used to say there's a big difference between a baton pass and a baton throw. You like the baton to be passed, not just flung when the child crosses the, leaves those high school doors. CMS waiver, informational bulletin. The reason I included this is, funding is a major issue in our systems, and the federal mandates and requirements point to what's allowable by our systems to provide to our consumers. So in this case, a major source of funding, about half the funding for the regional center system, comes from Medicaid. And they sent out an informational bulletin pointing to the priority of competitive integrated employment and giving the states freedom to develop services within their systems that would support individuals in achieving employment. You guys with me? All right, thank you. Next. So, California. This is a policy that we should all be very proud of. It took 6 years for it to pass. I sat through many a hearing. Many people played a critical role in ensuring its passage. In the early hearings, I literally had witnessed individuals standing in front of the legislature saying, individuals with developmental disabilities, an array of developmental disabilities, saying, I can't work, don't take my day program away from me. It was sad. Sad, not that I don't think that they valued their program, because I do think there are great programs that can be out there. I just think that it was such a counterpoint to saying, I want my choices recognized. I want to have an opportunity to look at what my hopes, dreams, and vision are for the future. And the best place for me to achieve that would be in this program. I know that might be a little sophisticated to have expected, but it was a very heartening 6 years later when it did pass to have people sort of universally giving up and saying this is the right direction for the state to go. That it is the policy of the state that the opportunities for integrated competitive employment shall be given the highest priority for working age individuals with developmental disabilities. The HCBS Settings rule, that setting rules is really sort of a major disruptor in the system, not only the regional center system, but also in the aging system, where typically people are provided programs in segregated settings. So the HCBS rule really points to the fact that a person-centered planning process needs to be used to determine what is the most appropriate setting for a person to be provided services and supports. So what that means is we can't automatically say, child X leaves high school and is immediately going to go to a day program. Or that all people who currently are in day programs, that is the right setting for them. That there needs to be a person-centered planning process and a priority set, and they're spending the majority of their day in integrated settings. Is that clear? Great. An integrated setting is basically a community setting where the ratios of people with and without disabilities mirror general society. So you wouldn't be finding, a bus exclusively with adults with developmental disabilities going to McDonald's. You would be undergoing a process to find out how each of those individuals values and wants to spend their day and developing an individual program for that person. This is a huge sea change for all of the providers who are taking a good and hard look at the way they operate their businesses and how they're going to be able to support people. And I think there's greater enthusiasm as people's values get closer to what these policies are intending. Maybe you've heard of self-determination. There's a lot of things that are in the works that will support people being in more integrated and community settings. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act really spoke most specifically to rehabilitation, and it creates a priority on serving youth, transition-age youth in school. In fact, they have to dedicate 15% of their resources to serving youth in schools. And it introduced a whole other service called pre-employment transition services, which could range from anything from sort of career awareness, career exploration, to internships and other opportunities. Next, please. And this is very important for you to know. That is new. I began, I think it was December 2013, when the Departments of Developmental Services, Education and Rehabilitation signed an historic MOU to coordinate and collaborate among the systems to prioritize competitive integrated employment for all of those individuals that each of those systems serve. So they spent a good year plus in developing the blueprint. It is now on their Health and Human Services website. I believe they either have or will be creating a blueprint that is more lay language. Right now, you pretty much have to know the vocabulary of each of those agencies to really understand it. But its intent is to jointly identify ways so that working together, they're going to create the linkages and hopefully that baton pass between them so that an individual can be supported to achieve the job of their choice. Also, it is based upon a person-centered planning process, and that is something the state as a whole is still grappling with. Each of the agencies believe that they use a person-centered oriented sort of framework for working with each of you and your family member to provide the services that they do. I think that the bar is actually higher within these various pieces of legislation that a person-centered planning process, rather than you going in and saying, these are the services I offer, choose amongst these services, that we're flipping the paradigm and saying, this is the plan that I have for my career, and what is it that your agency can do for me to support me getting there? So that's sort of flipping it. Does that make sense? Okay. But I digressed a little bit. The blueprint was this MOU. They subsequently have created this blueprint, and it's the partnership that I described. And next slide, please. So the blueprint itself serves as a roadmap primarily for the agencies on the kind of activities that they're going to need to do to achieve the goal that they aim to achieve. And it is a living document in that it's intended to be added to as best practices and good practices emerge. Next slide, please. It has three main goals. what I've been emphasizing is that it's intended to improve the collaboration and coordination between the agencies. It's to ensure that there's more opportunities for employment, and also to work more with some of what's called the workforce system that's out there to all Californians, so they too are working more with individuals with autism. And then finally, it is really to support people to make informed choices adequately in order to transition to employment. So an informed choice is not when you hand somebody and say, these are your 3 choices of what you can do during your day. An informed choice allows what any young or adult would need to experience is an opportunity to explore their interests, learn what their strengths are, be able to express their choices to whatever extent that they can, and be actively engaged in determining their own futures.
What are the 3 departments?
Education, rehabilitation, and the regional center system. And right now what's happening is that there are many communities that the first step is for local planning agreements to be established between the 3 agencies at the local level. So be listening for, or even ask at any, is our community involved in putting together a local planning agreement, and is there a spot on that team for a family member to participate, or I'd like to participate? Because it'd be great or it'd be critical that there be community input in terms of how they're designing these services, whether they're going to work for your families.
I'm sorry, where?
Right now they're anchored at every Department of Rehabilitation office. There's 13 around the state, but school districts have to be involved.
With the CID?
Yes.
So you could ask your school district?
Yeah, what are you doing? Are you getting involved? How are you getting, what's happening? Yeah. Let's.
And tell me if you want to say this later, but the workability,
Yes,
CTE,
yes,
do you know what I'm talking
Yes.
about? Last year, my son, we wanted to get him some sort of work experience.
Right.
They said he didn't have enough skills. And in my research, I found out that the whole point of workability was to give them skills,
Correct.
to prepare them. So on that basis, my district workability, Burbank, said no. And then this year, they said he's welcome to take a CTE class, and none of them really were appropriate for him. And yet, we live in an area where he has interests that local studios, post-production facilities, all we needed was some sort of facilitation of it, and they won't even come to an IEP meeting.
I don't have a response. I mean, other than to say pushback. That is not okay. It's just not, it's not okay. And the other thing you can do is call your Department of Rehabilitation and say, I'm ready to sign up. What are you offering in my school district? They're supposed to be doing pre-employment transition skills. And then if that doesn't work, call Disability Rights California.
Yes, also versus.
They're supposed to be pre-employment transition services. DOR is responsible for at least touch, but there's the transition partnership, TPPs, workability. There's a number of different programs. The other thing that's being offered now are internship programs through the regional center system, but that has to be worked out with your school or with a provider. So there should be activities happening. How old's your child?
He's 18.
Absolutely. At the risk of being a broken record, together these policies make it very clear that youth with significant disabilities must be given every opportunity, this is for you over here, to receive the necessary services to ensure the maximum potential to achieve competitive integrated employment. That the planning needs to be determined as a person-centered planning process. There's a variety of services that each of these agencies now offer, and they should be increasingly pushed to do it in a coordinated fashion. And and that you're also entitled to information. So if they're saying no, then the question to me would be, then what are you proposing? How is it that you're going to, make sure that they have a transition goal that speaks to whatever your child's preliminary interests are. So that, what are you doing to help my child get there? And they have to be held accountable for that. Okay, and then I do have some final recommendations. Next, please. So what can I do? Which is really, what can you do? The most important, there's a lot of literature out there, and there's sort of two key things that are really important to happen as quickly as possible. Your involvement, which I can tell you're being here, you already are a testimony to involvement, and your expectations of success, whatever that success means for your loved one. And those are the key indicators of post-school success. So if you are involved and those expectations are high, that is probably the best predictor of what's to come. And by employment, I think the other thing we didn't talk about that is also the elephant in the room, are we talking about 40 hours a week? What is it we're talking about? It's as little as much as your family member essentially aspires for. You may find a situation where you're doing other activities during the day or the week, and employment is part of it. There's very, very, very few individuals on the spectrum or with developmental disabilities that are working full-time. The majority have some kind of balanced schedule of work and other activities. And that's not to say in the future our expectations might be higher. That may not be acceptable, but that's sort of where we are now. Encourage your child or adult to create a vision of his or her future. Just remember, most of our kids are never asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm also a developmental psychologist by training. I also have raised my own children. I have a family member with a developmental disability. You change your mind when you're growing up. What your child says to you at age 11, 15, 18, at these days, maybe even at 25, they're emerging adults, they refer to them now. They're not even full adults then, they're emerging adults. So we need to allow our youth the same luxury of time that we provide to other youth. And that, you get pushed by the systems to make these hard decisions. That's not fair and that's not right. You have the right to make a preliminary decision. You got to try out work, see how that works for you, and then you might change your mind, or you might get more training, or you might have a different situation. So it is sure that it's important that it's a vision and a goal, but that you allow room for growth. Set the expectations for work. You want to talk about work. You want to find out what interests them. You want to give them chores at home so they get an idea of responsibility. Those of you that still have high school students or transition students, paid employment is one of the major predictors of post-school employment. It's almost like parental expectations and paid work experience would be where I would invest. Looking at what's getting in your way, in what way can you open yourself up to think of the possibilities. And you don't have to figure this out on your own. One of the things we also saw in those community conversations was the synergy when you got people together. Employers didn't realize in the room that their online application process made it impossible for many people to apply for a job, and they were really interested in solving that problem. How can we make sure that we hear about your good people to work with us? That was pretty cool. So it's that kind of thing, Look at your obvious supporters in your immediate community, the places that you go all the time, the people that you know. And oftentimes parents are increasingly playing a role, as they do with typical youth, by the way, in helping their child find employment. So I think those are the key points. I'm going to open it up to
What I'd like to do is move into the panel, and then we open it up to questions. So
Okay.
that way we can get a lot of information, and then we have a whole half hour of Q&A, discussion, questions. So you're going to get all your questions answered. But I'd love to give the panel the opportunity.
Okay, so then just one final word,
Yes.
which is the next slide. So Jeremy gets to bookend the presentation today. One of the paintings he did is of we called our great leader, Governor Brown. And this is Jeremy's statement. He paints, I don't know, there's a word for it. He does things by people's colors. Aura. But there's a different word he uses, but, so forgive me.
And so we're making every session making that possible. So we have awesome people who are here today. So I'm going to call each one of them. This session is sponsored by two organizations, FBO Solutions in Pasadena and Exceptional Minds. They have helped us run through and you'll hear about them in a little bit. So I'm going to call Morgan McCarthy. Please come up. Okay, we have Jacob Alston. Yes. We have Andres Lerma. Yes. And we have Ivan Garcia. So first of all, I want to thank them for coming tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I know, yes, thank you. Coming out for a long day's work, whatever we've done all day, just the freeways and being here, it's amazing. I really, really thank you for that. So I'm just going to, have each one of our panelists introduce themselves, and then Olivia has a few questions she would like to ask. And we do have Exceptional Mind. We have Ernie. Merlon is here. Ernie, please stand up. Yay! We have the executive director of Exceptional Mind. We have Judy Bennett, who is one of the founders of Exceptional Mind. We have Lucio Rossetti, who is from FBO Solutions in Pasadena. And Bob. Oh yes, so he's here as well from FBO Solutions in Pasadena. Okay.
Hello, I'm Jacob Wolfson. I work at Exceptional Minds Animation Department. I'm very good with animation, and the job I have there really works out my creativity. And it's really profitable. I mean, I work with a good crew. All of them are talented as me, and we do a lot of companies favors, like how we give them what they need. And I very much appreciate the work I do, and the work I'm given. I mean, my supervisor, he knows that I'm dependable, seeing that I'm dedicated to the job.
We'll ask you some more questions. Let's let them introduce themselves first.
Hi, my name is Morgan McCarthy. I am an employee at Ralph's grocery store in Arcadia. I worked there for 9 years, and I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy working with the customers and the employees there. That's about it.
Woo!
Good night, everyone. My name is Andres Lerma. I'm the student of Exceptional Minds. I want to talk about a little bit about me. I'm 24 years old. I'm autistic. Before I finish school, I want to be the producer of the animation. After I finish school, I'm looking for a school to study animation, but we found a place that is called Exceptional Minds. So my parents and I went to the interview. See, I go to Exceptional Minds, but I did. I'm a student now. Exceptional Minds is a non-profit vocational center and animation studio for young adults with autism spectrum. They have full-time program and prep program. So right now, I'm a prep program student that I went to part-time program that I am. So in the future, I want to be in a full-time student because the full-time program is they give the students to teach them with the technical training, willingness instructions, teamwork experience, etc. Exceptional Minds is a great place. They teach animation areas like Animate, Photoshop, VFX, etc. When the full-time program is over, they help the student to find a job. My goal in the future, I want to be a full-time student, finish the program, and work the animation area. I want to show a video what I do. But it's not yet. It's hard for people like me to find a regular job. But if you want to do what you want, is to study. Learn some techniques, and you need to achieve your goal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I work for Target in Pasadena, and I'm car attendant, working with the public as well, you know, doing carryouts and ringing up people's orders. I've been there for 16 years, and you know, I've been got the job through the workshop for the workshop,